Thanks everyone for joining. We're going to get started here in just a minute. Thanks everyone for joining. We're going to get started here in just a minute. Thanks everybody for joining. We're going to get started here in just a minute. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. Kyle Hoffman from the USTA Mid-Atlantic. I want to personally welcome each of you to the 2021 virtual show conference presented by the USTA Mid-Atlantic. We're excited to have you back tonight for our last night. And for those of you that are joining for the first time, welcome. A few housekeeping rules for tonight's session. We want this to be interactive, so please feel free to ask questions as we go along, and we'll do our best to answer. We are going to take, just for time sake, we're going to actually take the questions and answer them live at the end, or the Mid-Atlantic staff who's on as well will answer questions as we go along too. With that being said, just a reminder that the session is also being recorded and it will be available following the conference. Tonight's session, we're going to feature on U10 progression and tournament scheduling. I'm really excited to introduce the USTA Player Development's General Manager, Martin Blackman. Martin, we appreciate your time on coming on tonight, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks a lot, Kyle. And thank you to Rachel, you, Warren, Megan, and Janine for making this possible. I know there's a ton of work that goes in to planning a successful conference. And I want to thank all the coaches who made the time this evening to be with me. This is near and dear to my heart because my first 10 years as a coach were spent in the DC, Maryland area. And before I dive into this, I want to make sure we have a lot of time for Q&A at the end, but just a little bit about my background, because I know there are a lot of similarities in how we all become coaches. But I was a junior player. I was a collegiate player, played at Stanford, was a good junior, good collegiate player. I played on the tour for 6 years. And when I was coming off the tour, I had a couple more years to go to finish my degree. And, you know, I think for a lot of us, regardless of what level you play at, whether it's high school, college, or pro, when you don't fulfill your goals as a player, sometimes you have a little bit of a conflicted relationship with the sport. And when I came off the tour, I wanted to get away from tennis and do something completely different. And I was about to start at American University in their MBA program. And I was going to get my tuition paid for by being the assistant coach, which I thought was fine. You know, I'll work 3 hours a day and I get my tuition paid for. It's a great deal. And about a month before the season started, the head coach quit, and they were stuck with me. And it was a nice pay raise. I'd just gotten married, and I said, why not? And I completely fell in love with coaching. And so that's my beginning as a coach. And I'm going to share some things here with you, mostly from my experience with the USTA, working with our national coaches, but also just learning from coaches throughout the country like yourself. So first here, this is kind of our foundational principle of our USTA teaching and coaching philosophy. When I came into this position about 6.5 years ago, we had 5 principles that kind of began with patience, progressions, parameters, problem solving, um, and independence. And one of the things that I saw where I thought was missing, not necessarily in the approach of our coaches, but just wasn't being called out enough, was the concept of person first. Is that our first responsibility as a coach is to be a mentor and a role model, and to focus on the human development of the players that we work with. Obviously, we're not parents, but we have a responsibility. So these are six components that we kind of called out. Positive coaching, making sure that we're coaching character. To coach character, you have to demonstrate character as a coach. Understanding the age and stage of the player that you're working with, kind of what can they process, what can they understand. Making sure that there's healthy accountability for behaviors. And again, I believe accountability starts with the coach. So if it's about being on time, if it's about being engaged, and that's what we're demanding from our player, we've got to make sure that we're modeling it at the highest possible level as well. Just basic awareness about mental and emotional wellness. Sometimes for a lot of the kids that we work with, we're one of the most influential adults in their life. And it's important for us to be able to see red flags, and bring that to the attention of their parents, as it relates to their mental and emotional health. And just always having a long-term vision, a long-term approach in mind. It's always about process. We all know that when you focus on process, the outcomes will come, but focusing on outcomes is usually not healthy for the player or the coach or the parent. Thanks, Kyle. So these are some of the kind of attributes that we put together. It was a great process because these character qualities of compete like a champion. We actually surveyed all of the private sector coaches that came to our camps back in 2017, and asked them, what do you think are the most important attributes of a great competitor? And so this is something that maybe some of you contributed to, but confident, determined, engaged, professional, resilient, respectful, and tough. And I think if we all kind of thought about an American champion that epitomized one of these character qualities, we could. I think about determined. I think about Chris Everett. I think about confident. I think about Jimmy Connors. I think about respectful. I think about Billie Jean King. So I mean, these are all great qualities to talk to your players, even if they're only 7 or 8 years old, because becoming a great competitor is something that transfers into every aspect of their life, regardless of how far they go with their competitive tennis. So these were the 5 principles of the philosophy, and then in 2016 we added that foundational principle which we talked about at the beginning, which is person first. But patience speaks to the long-term developmental process. Progression speak to the way that we structure practices and kind of the recognition that a coach has kind of two different ends of the spectrum as they design the learning environment for their player. On one end, it's a very closed environment. And that's where if you're working on something technical and you're hand feeding and you're really zeroing in on one element of technique, that's a very closed environment. And then the most open environment, obviously, is a match. And everything in between is kind of what you have to work with when you're designing practices. Parameters speaks to the range of acceptability for technique, movement, and tactics. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Planning and goals, obviously, a big part of giving the player and the parent confidence in your vision for the player. And then problem solving, really the concept that, part of our job as a coach is to kind of work ourselves out of a job, and make sure that we're cultivating independence in the players that we're working with. So these are just a quick look, and I'll PDF this PowerPoint and send it to Kyle so he can share it with you guys after. But just a quick look at the strokes that we kind of focus on and some parameters for him. I'll just take one as an example. There are many different forehands stylistically, and many of them are very effective. There's no cookie cutter perfect forehand. But when we look at the best forehands in the world, let's say 99% of them, what we'll see is most of them, the grips are between semi-Western and Western. You don't have many pure Eastern or extreme Western grips at the very top of the game. The racket goes back above the hand. Contact is kind of comfortable extension away from the body. And the follow through is around the shoulder, between the head and the waist, depending on the contact point. So again, no cookie cutter prescription, but just making sure that we kind of have that understanding and we're coaching the players that we work with into those parameters. And we can skip through this one, Kyle. Thank you. And hopefully this is playing a little bit, but this is one of the links. We're going to send you guys a bunch of links to different resources. But this is a link to kind of showing how we can show a player and isolate a grip. In this case, Danielle Collins, or two-hander, is excellent. That bottom hand is close to continental, and the top hand is close to Eastern. And it's really clean contact. Her head is quiet. So these are all resources that we'll make sure to share with you afterwards. Also parameters for movement. I think sometimes as coaches, we default to technique. When a player misses a shot or when something's not working, the first thing we kind of look at is technique. As I've gotten older, I've realized that lots of times it's really a question of footwork and spacing and the correct use of a stance, the correct choice of the right stance, and getting to the ball, approaching the ball the right way with the right spacing. So maybe a tip for all of us is, make sure that you're thinking about and looking at footwork when you're addressing issues with your players. And this is a great kind of, slow motion representation here that shows Djokovic. One of the things you'll see is that almost all movement at the very top of the game is diagonal. There's certain cases where you've got to run hard to the right or the left, or straight forward. But most of the time, the most effective way to get to the ball in good position is to take a diagonal move to the ball. And probably the reason for that is because you're giving yourself an opportunity to get at least into a semi-open stance when you're making contact. This is a kind of a representation of the environment that I talked about and how the coach can structure a practice, kind of going from one end of the spectrum, which is very close and control, to going to the other end of the spectrum, which is very open. And these are some really important concepts. And I know most of you guys use these unconsciously, but kind of going from simple skills, what I would call simple skills, when you're asking the player to execute one thing like a backhand cross court or a forehand cross court, to a more complex skill where you're asking them to make high percentage shot selection decisions based on the ball that they're receiving. So let's just say, for instance, I'm doing a three-way drill on the forehand side. I'm moving the player laterally along the baseline. They have the option to go cross court or down the line. Ideally, you'd be more likely to go down the line if you beat the bounce of the ball. If I push them backwards into a semi-open stance, but maybe they've got to back up 2 or 3 steps, I'd expect them to go a little bit deeper through the middle cross court and a lot more shape on the ball, higher over the net. And then if I bring them forward, that's really a green light for them to go big down the line or short angle, depending on how high or low off the ground the ball is. So just a little example: hand feeding, racket feeding live ball, a predictable feed where your player knows exactly what you're going to feed, and then a dependent feed where you're varying your feed based on the last ball that was hit. And then the last progression here is kind of the concept of understanding that once you teach a skill, you have to train it. And once you train the skill, then you ask your player to execute it in player competition. Really important to never ask your player to execute something in competition that they haven't trained. And I'm going to go through these pretty quickly, but in between the red, orange, and green, or after the red, orange, and green slides, we've got some really good links, some really good video collections that I think you guys will enjoy. They were done a long time ago, but they're pretty evergreen. I mean, they still relate to what we're trying to do today. So this is a red player, could be 6, 7, 8 years old. They can kind of control things, between the shoulder and the waist. They can do a little bit of stuff above the head. They can, kind of execute a simple serve, but they can't go too low and they can't kind of manage that space around the head. And then the shaded areas are kind of some of the simple things that you can do with red players tactically. So this is the first collection. It's a video collection of Tenant under competencies on the 36 red. Technical, little bit tactical, little bit play. And you can also download the PDFs that go along with it. And it's a great guide just for kind of, if you want to put together a lesson plan for this type of player, this level player. I think you guys will really enjoy it. So for the orange player, we're moving to 60 orange. Some kids move faster. And that's another point I want to make. I talked to Rachel and Kyle about this a couple months ago, is, the pace of progression through the red, orange, and green is really based on the skill, the ability of the player, and the judgment of the coach. So, I never USTA has really gotten away from the whole mandate thing. But I think as a coach, you know, make sure you're not rushing through the progression, but also make sure you're not holding back an exceptional kid. And I think that's the balance. And I think for the most part, it's trying to go a little bit slower. And I think we all feel pressure from parents to go faster. So hopefully some of these resources, when you see kids that are really good playing on these modified courts, hopefully that gives you a little bit of ammo with the parents to say, hey, we can do some amazing skill development if we take our time here. So orange, the range, the child is able to control the levers a little bit more. Motor skills are getting better. And obviously you've got more action, you got more options tactically. So here's another great collection for 60 orange. I'm not sure which one she's in, but it's pretty cool because I do think Robin Montgomery is in one of these collections. So one of Mid-Atlantic's best players is in one of these. But same thing as the red, gives you a feel for what you can push and challenge your player to do on this format. And then lastly, the green, players 9, 10, 11, they're starting to get really good control of their body. They can handle above the head, at the head level, down low. The only thing that's challenging really for this player is the full length racket and the high bounce of a yellow ball. So this is a really important phase where you can push your players and get them really playing tennis. But you can avoid some of the challenges that happen specifically with the formation of extreme grips and defensive court position if you stay on the green a little bit longer. If you go to the full length racket too soon, if you go to the yellow ball too soon, you're kind of battling against the defensive court position because the kid doesn't want to be moonballed. And then, the strike zones above the shoulder are really going to create a temptation to go to extreme grips. And this is that last resource. So in a week or two, I'd love to hear from you guys if you've been able to go and check out some of these video resources, and I'd love to get your feedback. So a couple of the concepts that, again, I had some good calls with Rachel and Kyle, and I said, look, I want to pull out some things that maybe, you think coaches in the Mid-Atlantic would be really interested in. And I think, look, for all of us, planning is just so important. So, whether you're working with a recreational player, a player that maybe plays once a week, whether they play tournaments or whether they want to become, a really high level player. I think when you use these basic principles, what you're doing is you're giving the child and the parent some ownership of the process. And you're really creating a family engagement. And it also makes you accountable. Because if you put together a developmental plan and you put together the goals and you have some basic periodization in place, it helps to hold you accountable for what you want to do throughout the year, which I think is a good thing. So pretty text heavy, the next couple of slides. And that's why I'm going to PDF them and share them. But just some basic guidelines for that whole win-loss thing. I mean, one of the things that we really, in PD and throughout the country, the win-loss ratio is so important to keeping kids in the game. And here it says a 2 to 3 to 1 ratio, but unless you're working with an older high performance kid, I would really try to keep it at 3 to 1. I think success builds confidence, and just having success at every level is one of the things that keeps the kids coming back and makes them fall in love with the game. So I'd really lean towards a 3 to 1 ratio. Thanks, Cal. Some basic recommendations. Society we live in now, everybody is so overscheduled and everything has to be organized. But I'd really encourage, even though maybe, it hits your bottom line a little bit, I'd really encourage you to have your players take some time off every year, whether it's 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks. Have them take some time off every year. Make sure that in your program you've got some multi-sport components. I think sometimes, again, parents these days, they can't do another sport in an organized way. But if you can build in some athletic development, and if you can build in some informal multi-sport stuff, whether it's soccer or basketball or what have you, I think it's going to keep the kids fresh. It's going to minimize injury, and it's going to create a more well-rounded athlete. And again, I'll share these slides with you guys. And just finishing up here, the title of this was good to great, and the 5 bullets I'm going to share with you are as much for myself as they are for you. But when I take a step back and I think about the great coaches that I've met, and I think about commonalities in those coaches, these are 5 of the things that kind of keep coming back to me, and I think will resonate with you. So number 1 is, just be true to your passion. If your passion is working with 10 and under kids, then work with 10 and under kids. If your passion is working with adults, work with adults. If your passion is working in that kind of junior comp space, but you don't want to work in the high performance space, then do that. But whatever it is, if you want to be great, and we all want to be great, you've got to follow your passion. So keep listening to that. Number 2 is growth mindset. It's all about getting better. I'm sure that when I get to the question and answer part of this presentation, you guys are going to have some suggestions or some questions they're going to make me better and that I can take back to the team. So it's all about working on your weaknesses. It's all about soliciting critique. And I think the best coaches in the world are really good at soliciting critique from the players that they coach. So definitely want to embrace that. Be a student of the game, always learning, whether you're reading about ADM, whether you're reading about nutrition, biomechanics, age and stage, growth and development, or you're paying close attention to, what's happening at the top of the game. You got to keep learning. And when I say student of your student, I mean, understand what makes your students tick. Make sure that you're asking a lot of questions when you're coaching your students. Make sure you understand their learning style. Make sure you're paying attention to, maybe little Johnny or little Jane didn't sleep well last night. They stayed up late doing homework. Maybe something's happening at home. But really try to be aware of what your students are going through. It's going to make you a better coach, and it's going to make you a better mentor. Create a learning environment. I think one of the most basic things that we need to do as coaches is we have to create a learning environment. How do you structure your court? How do you design your court? Do you use targets? How do you space your kids? How do you keep your kids engaged? Do you use stations? Do you challenge them? So really pay attention to the type of environment that you're creating. And for every group and age and stage, that's completely different. I've seen Tenant under coaches that use journals and crayons and balloons, and those kids just can't wait to come back the next day. And then for some of your older players, maybe that means giving them more ownership. Maybe there's a couple times a week when you say, hey, you guys are going to design the practice today. What do you want to work on? So be creative about that, but I think it's really important. And then the last thing for me is giving back. This game has given so much to me. Every step of my career and my journey, people have given me opportunities, whether it was Nick Bollettieri, who gave me a scholarship to Stanford, Coach Gould, who gave me a scholarship. I'm sorry, Coach Gould, who gave me a scholarship to Stanford, Nick, who gave me a scholarship to the academy. I remember when I was 10 years old, my parents took me to a tryout at Port Washington, which at that time was like the best academy in the country. And I tried out for the academy, and they came up to my parents and they said, "Oh, congratulations, Martin. Martin made the program for the summer." And they gave my folks the price sheet. And my folks said, "Oh, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Unfortunately, we can't afford it, but thank you so much." And we were walking out the door, and right when we got to the bottom of the steps, the director of tennis of Port Washington came down the steps and said, "Hey, we're going to give Martin a scholarship for this summer." So, those are the kind of things that we can do today as coaches. There's so many different ways that we can give back, and I think it's really important. So thanks for that, guys. I hope it didn't go too long, but I'm looking forward to some great questions from you guys. Thank you.
All right, Martin. We've got a few questions coming your way, so I hope you're ready.
Ready, let's go.
All right. So back to the 3-to-1 portion of this. Given how many tournaments and stuff that are out there, how do you pick and choose which ones to play and obtain and maintain that 3-to-1 balance?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm sorry I didn't go as in depth on some of the slides as I wanted to, but I would say it's a kind of a basic principle of a third, a third, a third. So, a third of the tournaments, ideally, you want your player to be seeded 1 or 2, and you want them to get that feeling of playing on Sunday in the finals, regardless of what level it is. It could be level 7, 6, 5, but make sure that's a third of the tournaments that they play. A third of the tournaments where they're probably going to win a couple matches, but probably the chances of them getting past the semis is pretty low. So that's a third. And then a third where it's a real stretch, where they're playing up. They're probably going to lose first round. You don't want them to get smoked because that's no fun, but they're probably going to lose first round, but they're going to see the next level and hopefully be inspired by that. And I think working with your coach or coaches paying attention to whether that's a level 7, 6, 5, or 4, and trying to maintain that 3-to-1 ratio if you can.
And then the next question I have for you, and since you were talking a little bit about your own experience, and thank you for sharing that, is just kind of from an academy standpoint. At what point do you suggest parents should look at specializing their child in tennis or moving them into an academy-like program?
Great question, Kyle. Great question. Um, this is kind of funny because my 14-year-old daughter at the dinner table asked me and my wife yesterday if she could homeschool because she said she wants to train more. And we told her no. But look, I think it's a family decision. Um, and I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. I think there are a couple components that are really important is the temperament of the child. And lots of times kids are asking to be homeschooled so they don't have to get out of their comfort zone at school. And if that's the case, you probably want to keep them in regular school because the friction, the interaction, and just all the things they have to deal with in school cultivate resilience. Um, if you have a kid who is pretty social and still wants to homeschool and they're disciplined and they can kind and they're really kind of intrinsically motivated, that might be a kid that you want to consider that more strongly. And then the last thing I would say, do they need to? Do they need to train 4 hours a day? You know, because I'm a big believer in quality over quantity. And you know, if you train, listen, if you're super serious and you train for 1 hour in the morning early and 2 hours in the afternoon and it's high quality, that's that's a lot of training. So I wouldn't discount what you can do if you increase the quality of training, um, because homeschooling has a lot of unintended consequences that parents have to be ready for.
And I've got looks like a few more tough questions for you if you're ready for
Sure, sure.
them. All right. And kind of stick with that theme a little bit. If you could tell coaches to work on one thing to make them a better coach, what would it be?
Wow, that is a great question. That is a great question. I would say if there's one thing, I would say understanding how to design a practice and the purpose behind that. And that could be for a private lesson, or it could be when you have 4 kids on a court. Um, I think if you take the time to be really intentional about how you design your training, you learn more as a coach and your kids learn more, but it takes a lot of work. Um, you know, I remember when I was in the private sector, me and the coaches that were on our team, you know, we get done maybe, I don't know, 8 o'clock at night. We'd spend a full hour afterwards planning the next day of practice. And then on the weekends, we'd spend a couple hours planning the week of practice. So I would say that's probably the number one thing.
I'm going to flip it now from a parent perspective. And for parents, what would be some activities, non-tennis related, that they can work with their child on that will ultimately help their tennis game as well?
Yeah, another great question. So I mean, I'd kind of think of athletic development and think of all the things that we did 100 years ago when I was a kid. Running, jumping, playing pickup hoops, um, playing kickball, playing soccer. Um, a lot of those things you can still play informally, and the more you do that, the better. Um, if that's a challenge for parents, I think kind of making sure that your child has a really good dynamic warm-up routine, you know, with plyometrics and range of motion, functional movement, and a really good cool down routine. Um, that would be my second choice because it's so structured, it's not super fun, but at least if you have a really good dynamic warm up, you're kind of activating your body in different ways, but ideally look for ways for them to play other sports informally.
Yeah, and obviously at the end of the day, you're still mom and dad.
You're still mom and dad, and you can still go in the back and throw a football, right?
Right. All right. And then what's the biggest mistake you see a coach make when coaching a youth player? And what's the biggest mistake you see from a parent when coaching a youth player?
Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one. I'm going to cheat on this one, Kyle. I'm going to go 2. So the 2 biggest mistakes I see coaching, and I've made both of them, are number 1, saying that you're all about the process. Okay, saying that you're all about give 100%, do the things we worked on in practice, have a good attitude, and then the kid loses a match really badly, and then you get upset with them. That is not good, and that really sends the wrong message. And the opportunity we have as coaches is when a kid does play with a good attitude, they do give 100%, and they do try to do what you worked on with them. If they lose that match 6-love, you've got to praise them. You got to praise the snot out of them. So that's really important. Secondly, I would say it's a default to technique. Whenever anything goes wrong, there's the coach kind of goes straight to technique. It's got to be the technique. And like I said before in the presentation, usually it's footwork. And the footwork is driving, the technique is kind of a result of poor footwork. On the parent side, I would say it's the same thing I said on the coaches. I mean, that car ride home, if you want to connect with your son or your daughter, and you want to build a confident, resilient competitor with tons of self-esteem, you have to praise them after they give a good effort. You just have to. And that's such a good opportunity for a parent. And then the flip side of that, Kyle, is if you got a player who wins a match and they had a bad attitude and they were cheating and they were doing the things that they're not supposed to do, if they win that match, it's not a celebration. You know, it's a really tough conversation about, hey, you won the match, but I don't care. Like the way you behaved out there, not happy with it. You know, that's not that's not the character that we're working on. So I think the flip sides of those 2 coins are funny. It's a funny thing. I remind my mom of it now is I tease her about it. When I used to win a match, we would go to there's a place in New York called Beefsteak Charlie's, which was like a real high-end place. And when I lost, we'd go to Taco Bell. So my mom didn't learn that lesson very well, but yeah, that's really important by parents.
Hopefully your love-hate for Taco Bell has changed over the years.
I'm good with Taco Bell. I'm good.
Well, you must have peeked at the next question that came in as well, because someone had asked, talking about if you could speak a little bit on the integrity of teaching your players about being honest, as coaches, you know, making sure that they're making correct calls, not cheating, and making sure the parents are also teaching their kids to be honest when they play.
Yeah. It's so important, Kyle. And, you know, this is really, really tough when you're in the private sector because there's so much pressure to win. You cover those tournaments on the weekends. You know, most of the time you're not charging the parents for it. You're just going there because you care. And usually when kids cheat, there's a deeper issue. Usually. Sometimes they just do it because they can get away with it, and then you have to deal with it at some point. But usually there's a deeper issue. Usually it comes from either perceived or real pressure. And to me, you've got to really nip it in the bud. I think maybe there are a couple ways you can do it. I mean, when my kids are playing, I have 4 kids and they all play tennis at one level. One of them I saw early on in the 10 and under was making bad calls. And I pulled him off the court twice. Probably not a good kind of USTA thing to do. Like you're taking the kid out of the match and everything. But I pulled him off the court twice, and I told him why, and it never happened again. Never happened again. Now with kids in your program, I think you have to talk to them after the match. And I think probably the first time you talk to them without the parent, so they're not embarrassed, and you say, hey, listen, I know you might be feeling a lot of pressure, but in my mind, you made 3 or 4 really bad calls out there, and that's cheating, and we don't do that. So I really, really want to encourage you to never do that again. If you do, we're gonna have to have a conversation with your parent. So yeah, it's tough, and you probably lose a little bit of business from time to time if you take that stance. But I think you can also mitigate having to deal with it at tournaments if it becomes part of the fabric of your program, and you talk about it during your program, and whatever game it is you're playing, up the river, down the river, baseline points, whatever, the understanding is that you don't cheat. So yeah.
And maybe this kind of ties into this a little bit too, but your opinion, why do you think coaches shy away from 10 and under events?
I think 10 and under events and 10 and under formats in their programming. And so I was in the private sector for 4 years, and we were in business for 1 year, and then we started a 10 and under program. And we were really intentional about starting with 7 and 8-year-olds. And so the first year of the program was red and orange. We didn't even have any green the first year. And I would say 25% of the parents who brought their kids to try the program, walked away and said, no, we don't want to play baby tennis. We came here to play real tennis. And we were okay with that. But what we did is the core nucleus of the 12 kids that, and the parents who bought into it, we made it so kind of energetic and compelling and fun and challenging. And I made sure that our best coaches were working with the 10 and unders. So I think what happens a lot in the private sector, the dynamic is that you put your least experienced coaches with the 10 and under program. And then you're kind of perpetuating that cycle of, it's not really serious. So I think one way to flip the script on that, Kyle, is to make sure that there's a real level of professionalism and organization with the 10 and under program, and your best coaches are involved in it.
And I think that's good advice. I do think you see that a lot, where that's kind of overlooked, but that's obviously a player that might be in your program for 10, 12 years, potentially. So, it's a huge value in having. One more question just came in. I'll answer this one real quick, and we'll do some fun ones here with you.
Okay.
And just kind of back on the cheating comment of, how do you instruct players when their opponents might be cheating?
Yeah, it's so tough. There's nothing more heartbreaking to see your own kid or a kid that you coach, literally getting cheated out of a match. But I think you play by the rules. My thing is always, the first time you think your opponent makes a bad call, give them the benefit of the doubt, ask them if they're sure. The second time, go get the umpire, the roving official, and keep getting them every time. And that's really all we can do. And you play and play inside the lines, bring the lines in a little bit.
We don't always have Hawkeye on the court, so we have to do what we have to do.
Yeah, I played some college matches where like coaches like, stay away from the lines, Martin.
It happens. Well, let me ask you some fun ones, Martin. So I know you get this question a lot or comment a lot. How many times per week do you hear my child's the next big thing in tennis, or you should see how good this player is?
I would say every day. I
Just a
would
little
say
bit
every
then.
day.
And how many times are they right?
Yeah, I'd say maybe once a month. I'd say maybe 1 out of 30. But I'll tell you the fun thing about that though, Kyle, is when you get that from a coach or a player, the thing I love about it is I love the enthusiasm and the optimism. And the answer is even if they send you the video and the kid is not really on track, the answer is never to be negative. The answer is always to kind of meet them where they are and keep that fire and that passion alive and give them some encouragement and some thoughts for how they can get to the next level. So, it is kind of a cliche in our sport, but I love it.
And then for you, who was your tennis role model growing up?
So my first tennis role model was Arthur Ashe. When I was 5 years old, I listened to the Connors Ashe final, Wimbledon final on the radio. We couldn't get it on TV. And so he was my first. And then after that, I was just a total tennis nerd. So whether it was Connors or Vilas or McEnroe or Borg, I loved watching those guys. But I think even at that age, 5, 6 years old, realizing what a milestone it was for a black man to win Wimbledon. And I mean, Connors was the best player in the world then. I mean, I think Connors was like the 3-1 favorite for that match. And the commentating was great. So you could hear what a tactical match it was. So that made a really big impression on me.
Yeah, and I think our section's just a little bit familiar with him.
There you go. That's right. Proud, Mid-Atlantic proud.
That's
Love it.
right. And then for you, favorite professional moment?
So I didn't have many as a player. I told you guys I didn't really achieve my goals as a player, but I'll give you one as a player and then one as a coach or in this role. So I would say one as a player was I only won one challenger event in my entire life, and it was in Brazil. And the reason it's really special is because I had lost 4 first rounds in a row, and I told my parents, I said if I if I don't win this tournament, I'm quitting. And I thought that was an easy way out. And I played so free the tournament, played the best tennis of my life, and won the tournament, and then ended up playing for 2 more years. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, whether I should have played for 2 more years or not. But that's a great memory. And then as a professional, I just every time we have an event, and I think the most special events for me are the camps that we have. From 2009 to 2019, we were averaging about 50 Team USA section camps. And just the way those camps work, you come in on Thursday, you have dinner with the PD manager and the coaches commission. Then on Friday, you meet with all the, we invite all the top section coaches, like the coaches that are on this call, and we get together and we just talk tennis and we learn about what's happening in the section, how we can do a better job of serving them and supporting them. Then on Saturday and Sunday, we have the camp and we're working side by side with the private sector coaches. And then we kind of wrap it up, and we have some great dinners in between. And just the camaraderie of working with the coaches in the section, the impact of doing the parent education, and then the look in the eyes of the kids that are going through those camps and how fired up they are. Those are my best memories of, those are probably my favorite thing about this job. Is
Then we're going to ask you one more, and we'll throw it on the flip side. So,
okay.
What's the most embarrassing moment for you on the tennis court?
Embarrassing. Well, anytime you get just spanked, it's embarrassing, right? So I remember once when I was at my career high ranking, maybe like, I don't know, 155 or whatever. And I played this kid, this 17-year-old kid in a challenger. I think it was in the Netherlands. And I never heard of him, but everybody said he was so good. And his name was Marcelo Rios. And he gave me a beat down that kind of helped to shorten my career. Let's put it that way.
He ended up having just an okay career, so to speak.
Yeah. So after the fact, I don't feel so too bad, but it wasn't fun.
Yeah. Well, and you saw him early, so I don't think people may have known at that point of how good he was really going to end up being.
Exactly.
Well, thank you, Martin, for talking with us and spending your time here this evening and enlightening us on a lot of things that are going on, and kind of helping us become better coaches and parents. And thank you, everybody, for joining our webinar today. Thanks to the Mid-Atlantic staff for helping on the back end as well. I appreciate you guys. Appreciate everybody on for the last 3 nights as well. Again, this webinar has been recorded, and we'll send you a recap email with the recording and additional resources by the end of the week. So be on the lookout for that. And as always, if you have further questions, please email youthplay@mas.usta.com. And we look forward to seeing you and your juniors out on the courts. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Kyle.